Today we're going to be looking at how to make this sound in Filterverse. It is a synth preset this time. The oscillator is within Filterverse. And the range that you play is going to make a big difference. This is the third video in the installment. We're going to be building on concepts from the second video, the one on adding the sequences like this to do some interesting modulation. In that case, we did much more severe modulation. These are actually a little bit more laid back. And yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, this is the reason we have that motion during the longer notes. Yeah. So that bow is actually the jump down here, and then this is just adding some extra movement. And then we have some FM. So without the frequency modulation, that's what it sounds like. It's pretty interesting to hear. With and without it. So we're going to be diving a bit into this. There's going to be two new concepts. Well, three really. It's the first time we're going to be using two Swiss Army knives in the same patch. We're going to be doing some serial processing. We're going to see a little bit of frequency modulation, and we're also going to use it as a synth. Now, I'm going to add this video to the playlist. There is a video on how to set up Filterverse to work as a synth with MIDI that I've already done. So I'm not going to cover how to do that in this video. Instead, we're going to dive straight into making a cool patch. One other thing I need to really quick show you is I do have a series of effects here at the end. Without the post-processing, it sounds like this. That's what it sounds like. And so with it, they're pretty much all mix moves. There's a bit of a rebalancing move with the Pro Q4 here. And then to make it sound wider, I am using Wider, a completely free plugin from Polyverse as well. And so I would check this out. It's a mono-compatible stereo widener. Very, very cool. One of their first ones. And then there's a limiter here that I'm actually using as a sidechain compressor. So not a lot going on here. So let's go ahead and get started with the patch making. So we're going to be doing something kind of like this. Now, again, there is a video I have specifically on how to make this. And so I'm just going to go ahead and point you towards that video. I'm going to add it to the playlist. So you can just look in the playlist. It'll probably be the video just before this one or just after this one. So let's add a new patcher. And if you're in another DAW, you're just going to have to set up MIDI the way you would set up MIDI in your DAW. But we need to get MIDI into Filterverse in order to do some of these concepts. I am going to simply load a preset, and I saved mine as Filterverse Basic Synth. It's going to bring it up, and I need to change this to be a different port so that we're using a different port than the other instance I have in here. So you won't need to do this if you're following along. Also, I was told that if I set my default to this and hit save to default, it would open at the right size, but it still opens up at this smaller size. And now there's a dot next to this. So it didn't work. That or I did it wrong. I don't know. So we have it here set up to work as a synthesizer. And we talked at length about how to set this up in the video on setting up super easy MIDI in Filterverse. I am going to go over to a sawtooth waveform. That's what we're going to be using. And for this, I'm going to really quick move this off the screen. Let's go ahead and grab this bass riff that we have here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. If you're interested in the MIDI, this is what it sounds like. We're at a tempo of 174 beats per minute. And we go through these chords. And this is going to be the line that we use. So I'm just going to take that. I recommend you write some basic MIDI. It doesn't have to be exactly what I have, but something kind of interesting to use. So now we have some basic MIDI that Filterverse can take in and use, and the oscillator is going to use it, and the oscillator is being controlled by this ADSR to make the sound. Amazing, right? Okay, so we're going to use that previous idea we had where we had a sequencer and we made it monopolar, which just means that it goes from 0 to some maximum value. You can still make it negative. It'll just go from 0 to some negative value, some maximum negative value, or 0 to some positive. It doesn't go above and below. It only goes in one direction now. And we're going to go ahead and just go ahead and add in some lines here, some bars, readjust it. We're going to use the shape parameter just as before. And for this, I'm going to make my rate slower. I'm going to put it at 4. I can't remember what I settled on in the last one, but this is one of the things I spent a long time messing with. Now, when we add this, we're going to be doing something with a lot of resonance. I'm going to go ahead and bring this down. I'm going to hit the 8 and bring the resonance up. And the type of sound we're going for is going to have a really resonancy growl. And they typically don't do so good with low pass filters. It's one of those things you learn with experience, but this is going to have a much more low end sound. It can be done. It's just going to be a totally different vibe. So I'm going to go for the high pass filter here, and we're going to want to be moving the filter up and down through this interesting region. And with a rather high resonance, we have this. And for now, the game plan is we're going to dial in this one filter, and then we're going to stack it with a similar motion. And by having 2 points, the interaction at the 2-point mark can be very interesting. It can cause some of those cool sounds you heard earlier. There's actually a ton of things that can happen there. And so you kind of have to pick what you want to do. So let's go ahead. We're going to set this up to interact with sequencer 3. It's going to move around, you know. And if we go ahead and hit play, let's add in our next modulator. We are going to be grabbing the sequencer again. I went down to 2 steps. In the video where I show this, I do 4. But I'm going to do 2 here, and I'm going to set it to max and min. And the idea is I'm just going to use the depth to sort of pick where I want it to be, how much I want it to affect this. We are going to take this and also choose the shape C0, somewhere in that neighborhood, to get a square wave style deal. All right, so let's go ahead and add the modulation to sequencer 3. I'm going to come in here. I am going to go ahead and bring up sequencer 4, and let's just hear what that sounds like. Yeah, it's going to be a little wild, and this is a good chance to talk about glide. So if you have a high glide, it's going to sort of smooth it out a little bit. You'll hear it. This is what it sounds like. You don't hear each individual thing anymore. It's kind of been smoothed out. And if you take glide all the way down, you hear the full motion. So it's up to you what you want, but I think I actually want less glide this go around. And I'm also going to dial this in a bit. It's going to take a bunch of sort of finessing to get this exactly how you want. You might also experiment with changing the number of steps. And then I'm going to mess with the rate here and the rate here. So choosing a base rate to work with. Okay, I think I've found it. So this is what I've settled on. I picked a rated 2 here, a rated 2 here, and I adjusted the rate modulation so that the region when this is low is quite slow. So during these long notes, we'll have these interesting motions like you heard in the original. When I held the note out, there were still motions going on. But when it goes faster, it actually acts like modulation, providing a change in the tone. Now, we can adjust the depth here to sort of influence the tone, and also on those longer notes, what it'll be like. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and stack on top of this a round of ADSR-ness. So we're using this to control the envelope of the oscillator, which we set up again in the setup video for the synth preset. What we're going to be doing is also using that to drive the filter. And I'm also going to set this at -36, just straight up. Let's go ahead and dial in that. Again, we're going to positively relate it because we want it to come back to this value. Let's bring up the drive down. So I settled on this for the drive. It sounds like this. I'm going to go ahead, and now that I can hear the drive and sort of how this works, I'm going to go ahead and change how much this influences it. I'm also going to take a look here at this modulation and experiment with some more values. I think actually a higher value is going to work better in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that. All right. So let's add in the frequency modulation. So if we come down here and add another oscillator, this is going to get a little crazy. But basically, we are going to go in, pick an oscillator. I'm going to choose to FM oscillator 1. And we can do that by simply clicking right here, and we can just bring this up. So FM is deeply changed by the ratios things are at. So I'm going to bring up this factor control. Well, let's go ahead and clone this. So if you hold Alt and click drag, you will actually copy these settings over to the second module. So now we have this first one, and it's going to go into a second one doing all the same stuff. Now the drive is going to be kind of crazy. So preemptively, I'm just going to take it down to 50. Let's hear it. There is one control here that is going to be a major factor in the sound, and that is this modulation depth right here. This is actually a lot for this style of FM. What we're doing with a really high frequency, we could do with a lot less. So let's go ahead and dial this back. Just use your ears, but it's going to need to be very small. Somewhere in that neighborhood, I think. And let's go in and also change the depth a little bit so that the filter spreads a little bit as it goes through the motion with the ADSR. So the resonances won't quite line up until they are at either the very beginning of the envelope or the end of the envelope. And so that would sound like this. You might experiment with different drive values, like 100 here might be a bit much now. And you could also experiment with drive being before or after. And this is where you get into the weeds and just try stuff out. Try different resonance values. Try making it move more. Give one more modulation and one less modulation on the cutoff. You know, all these kinds of things can be interesting things to explore, but we essentially have the sound now. Now, it does have a lot of low end on it. And I can't remember if I did this, if I kept this move on the last one, but something we could try is coming in, and there is one called equalize. And all this is a filter, and I usually am grabbing this to sort of try and fix things later on. So if we pull this down, we could choose low, high, or bell. We're going to go with low, and it just is a cutoff right here. I'm going to make it kind of as steep as we can go and dial this in to an area I think is going to work. I would supplement this with a separate sub, and if you're unfamiliar with what that means, it's just create another patch that is just a sine wave and let the sine wave play all the same stuff and let it be the low fundamental of your sound. In this case, I do have a separate sub in the original. So if we have a look here, this bass riff, you probably can't hear that if you're listening over a phone or headphones, but that's what's supporting the low end. And then there's this bass guitar that also supports it. And then with my original patch, now this is probably pretty close actually to what I had. There's going to be small differences. I may have added a few like subtle changes here or there, but the general concepts are there. It gets you pretty close to that kind of sound. The rest is just dialing it in with your ears. Now, the next section was, if we listen to this, it is missing the width. There's no width. There's actually ways to add width right in here. Like, for example, you could create a stereo ADSR, and so the left and the right channels would be different. I am not going to do that. I left everything in mono, and what we're going to do is there's a free plugin from Polyverse called Wider. And if you get Wider, by the way, if you're looking to get Filterverse or Wider, I'd appreciate it if you use the links in the description, specifically for Filterverse. I don't know if Plugin Boutique has Wider, but they are affiliate links, so I do make a little bit of money if you use those. We're going to use Wider to open this up. I'm just going to drag it to the side. I'm always trying to drag up and down with this plugin. It drives me freaking bananas, as it's like one of the only ones you drag sideways to make it open. But anyways, here it'll sound wider. Again, you need to be like headphones or some sort of stereo thing if you want to hear this. And we also, I'm going to add, now you might not have this one. You'll have to use whatever filter plugin you have for equalization. But I'm also going to add in a resonance suppression band for this high end. And that's the post-processing done. Now in here, I'm going to fine tune it a little bit. So if you're curious about the original patch and the levels I sort of settled on, this is filter 1 and 2. And you can sort of see how they were. You can see I also dragged and sort of messed around with the order a little bit more. I didn't use the equalization step I showed at the end. I instead opted to do stuff with the equalizer at the end anyway, since I figured I'm going to be using it for the resonance stuff. So why not do it there? The modulation values for the first filter and the modulation values for the second filter. So you can see there are some differences there and how they work. And I also have less drive in the first phase and more in the second phase. Both have pulls of 4 and are high passes. And then the sequencer and the depth for the oscillator. So you can see the oscillator is pretty much the same. For the sequencer, I did keep 16 steps. And I brought the modulation value quite high, 22.7. And you can sort of see the rate that I just settled on here. And that's that. The glide is brought up a little bit. The pitch of the oscillator is down an octave on this one. That's something I didn't do in the original. It's also been moved a hair off the perfect. This has like almost no impact, but it's something that I wanted to point out. And the modulation depth on this, that's the depth that I settled on. So that's what this one sounds like. Now on the one we just made, we could make a few of those adjustments really quick. So we could bring this up to 16 and see how that does with these higher rates. The depth I settled on is actually pretty similar. Let's take the EQ step out at the end. And let's also go in and lower the pitch by, this one's already down by 10. Let's go ahead and lower it by all the way down to 12. I don't know why it was down to 10. And so this is what it sounds like. And this is one of those things where you could try, but man, getting the exact same values, it can just take a while to arrive something similarly. Like here we went for less drive, and then on this one we hit, I settled on a pretty similar move. This is more significant than you might think, because if you feed an overdrive signal into this, the resonance this gives is going to stack differently than the other one. That's why in the first video when I talk about resonance, I'm like, you want to be careful with the drive. Like if it's a single filter with one drive, that's one thing. But if you're stacking things and doing interesting things with resonance, you got to be careful where you introduce the drive because it could drastically change later stages, which can be cool. But it also can completely change the sound that you're going to get. What do you think of the patch down below? I'm curious to know if you're going to pick up Filterverse. Again, there's a link down there. I'd appreciate it if you use it. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.